And as we just created a list inside the ARD, now will be the perfect time to do this. Welcome to section 6 of the Beekeeper Video Training Guide. And in this section, we're going to focus on more areas of the data editor, more of an intermediate section of data editor, and we are going to do this with the help of App Builder. The first part of this section will focus on the ARD, and thankfully we've explored this earlier as we had to create a list which we used inside a string property to create a drop-down menu. Now, to begin, let's categorize each new edition of the ARD to keep things cleaner. We could do this by selecting Add a New Folder, then give it the name Week Weather, describe it, and then save. Drag and drop the Week Weather steps property that we created earlier, or the list that we created earlier, into the folder. Looking at the rest of our options in the ARD, we also have the ability to create a constant. Constants in App Builder work similarly to lists, although they are a single constant we do not usually change, and rather than an array of constants that we do not usually change. And they're more used for singular purposes, so they can also be used inside a business rule to aid complex business features too. We can also add a table for a more structural or relational representation of data. And one example of how we can use ARD tables inside the rule will be if we were to map out last week's weather inside a table and compare it to this week's weather inside another table. They may want to see how Thursday, the 24th of June last year, 2017's weather, compared to the weather of June the 27th of this year's weather. And they can even use that result to display a message at the end of the rule through our BRC tool. Further highlighting one possible example of complex business logic. As with the majority of screens inside Beekeeper, you can also filter through content results by using a search bar. There are many use cases where clients will use their front-end application in countries with different languages. This means that localization capabilities are not only important, but also must not become a complex task inside Beekeeper. The Translation tab in Data Editor offers a great way to add translations to our properties in our data model and also the application itself. The data application meaning that we can translate our business features, steps, and links too. Since we already have started in English, well, I hope so, we cannot assume that another client may build their application with English too. Therefore, we add translations by clicking the Translations tab in Data Editor, then clicking on the Add Translations button. A pane will open, giving us the option to select our desired language. Select English - United Kingdom, then make it default by clicking on the default checkbox. You can also give this an optional description if you want. Click on Save to close the pane. Select the language, and now we have entered the screen showing our data model on the left hand side, containing our properties and objects that we created earlier. On the right hand side, we have a channel selector defaulting to master, and also a drop down menu allowing us to select transition value. Channels highlight Beekeeper's omni-channel capabilities, and we will explore them now. But just a few more things before we visit channels. As you scroll down, you can see that each property or object or array is adjacent towards its own translation field. Objects or arrays are expanded by default, but as the model grows, scroll performance may decrease due to the sheer size of some models of certain business uses. So we can collapse objects and arrays to speed up scrolling. You can also compare a language translation to another language, and we can add error messages and default messages through the Translate Value drop-down menu. We are now going to create a new business feature for our application. Here is the scenario. A company plans to allow a user to access the application journey on their desktop tablet, or smartphone. They want to allow a user to capture the weather of their hometown through their device's camera. The business feature is mandatory as each image submission will be entered into a competition. The company realizes that not every device may not have a camera available, so they want to make this step optional. The company is happy to allow a user to describe their current weather situation through a message box. So how will we go about solving this? In the next video, we'll be talking about channel-specific translations, but after that, I'm going to give you the exercise, so be prepared. Alright, we are progressing well onto building out our own omni-channel application, and we haven't even written a single line of code. Before we get too excited, let's create the channels first. We will then add translations based on a step inside a completely new business feature. Start by clicking the spanner/screwdriver icon on the top right hand side of the top navigation bar to get to the settings section. Once you're there, select data, then channels. Simply click on the add new button and name it mobile for now. Then of course save. Let's go back to iBuilder to build out our new competition feature. The next section will be an exercise, which is going to be fun because we will now explore an actual business implementation that will be possible based on your knowledge. For the fourth exercise of this Beekeeper video training guide, here is the scenario. A company plans to allow a user to access the application journey on their desktop, tablet, or smartphone. They want to allow the user to capture the weather of their hometown through their device's camera. This business feature is mandatory as each image submission will be entered into a competition. The company realizes that not every device may not have a camera available, so they want to make this step optional. The company is happy to allow the user to also describe their current weather situation through a field in another step. Okay, so here's part one of the exercise. First, I want you to create a new feature called photo competition. And just like the rest of the steps, it will be camel casing. Then you create 4 steps inside this feature. First one will be entry details. Second one will be image capture. Third one will be alternative, which will host the text box for the alternative option of not having a camera. And the fourth one will be thank you, which will be the final step of this business feature. Then I want you to create properties for these steps, each of these steps, and then you can place them inside an object. One recommendation will be to create 4 different objects for those 4 steps. You have the freedom to name these properties wherever you like. So each step should also have a precondition on either the create or the edit link. So it's up to you for you to decide if this step requires a create link, a create and an edit link, or just an edit link. There is no right or wrong answer for this part of the exercise, although you will need to follow these conditions. There has to be a first name, which is a string, of course, and an age, which will be a number. And you can place these properties inside the step that you see fit to place them. The next one will be that a property called weather image, which is a string, needs to be inside the image capture step profile. So the data profile of the image capture step. The thank you step needs to be the last in the flow. So it'll run from entry details, image capture, alternative, then thank you. The alternative step needs to have a precondition on the create link, as in it needs to be optional. And the thank you step cannot have an entry data profile, so you do need to add at least an object with a property to this one. And it should only be accessible if one field has been submitted or posted through either the image capture step or the alternative step. No business rules are to be created at this stage. I want you to focus on preconditions because preconditions will help you solve this exercise. Tips. You can also decide on the order of the flow between these 4 steps, but you must follow the conditions mentioned. Think about what the user would need to do to enter on each step in the real world situation, And also, before I continue, actually, the reason why we're not using any business rules on a business feature is because this is only part one of the exercise. In the next section, or the next part, we'll focus on adding business rules to our create and edit links. So one more tip will be that there is no limit to the amount of properties you can enter for each step, but at the same time, you will not want a user to fill in too much information, of course. I mean, you wouldn't want the user to get bored by filling their application, they'll just switch it off. Don't forget to add or make the relevant properties user defined, of course, by editing the data profile of a step. Play around with the available blocks, and there is a channel block available. You can have a play around in the variable section, and once you use that channel block, you can also set the channel or use the channel as a condition to go to one step or the other. Up to 15 minutes of this exercise or this part of the exercise is recommended for completing it. So take your time, play around, and you can pause this video now. Once you're ready, the next section will be the answer, or I should say again, just my solution towards this exercise. I hope you've enjoyed working on this part of the exercise. Let's compare our approaches. I first created the photo competition business feature and the entry details, image capture, alternative and thank you steps through the directory. I then created 4 objects, one for each step, and here they are with the properties / objects that I've added to the ADM. So for the first step, which is the entry detail step, I added the user object, I call it user, and this object contains these properties. So you have first name, which is a string, you have last name, which is a string, you've got age, which is a number, which was a requirement for this exercise, and email, which is also a string. For the image capture step, I created a object called image, and this contains 2 properties. One is weather image, which is a string, and the other is a Boolean property, which is weather image confirm. These Boolean properties will be converted to a checkbox. So the confirmation will be in the form of a checkbox in the front end application once the user visited this step. The third object I created for the alternative step will be alt image, which I called it, and this only contains one property, which is message, and this will be a string. And the final object which I created is called thank you step, because I couldn't think of a name, and this also contains one property, and this is called submission confirmation. And just like the weather image confirmation, which I created in the image capture step, this will be a Boolean 2. After placing these objects in their relative steps, I change the data source of the settings inside the data profile to user displayed. Okay, so for the links, for the entry detail step, I added a create and edit link. For the image capture step, I added just a create link. For the alternative step, I added a create and edit link. And for the thank you step, I added a create and edit link too. I then added the preconditions. So with the preconditions, using the blocks that were for my disposal in the visual editor, starting with the entry detail step. For the create link, I added no precondition actually on this create link because it's the first step in the business feature. I mean, there's nothing saying that we shouldn't start the feature. So I did not add any precondition on this create link. So it will just show. But for the edit link, I did add a precondition, and I called this precondition based on this statement. So if the length of first name, so the string property, is equal to or less than 2, then the link is available. So in other words, if this contains less than 2 characters, then the link is available. If it contains more than 2 characters, then we are happy with the length of the name, so we allow the user to continue with their submission. Remember how with edit links we do need an excuse, I'll call it, to move on. So the edit link will be unavailable if this statement has not been met. Sorry, the edit link will be unavailable if the statement has been met. Okay. Um, for the second step, the image capture step, I only added a create link, which is the reverse of the precondition on the entry detail step. So this time it will be if the length of first name is greater than 2, then the link is available. So in other words, this create link will show, or we will show the step if the length, or we are happy with the length of the user's first name. For the first step, which is the alternative step, I added both a create link and an edit link, but for the create link, actually, no, I did not add a create link. Added nothing to the create link. Sorry, added no preconditions to the create link. For the alternative step, for the create link, I did not add a precondition, but for future reference, we will add a precondition based on a channel to this create link later. So congratulations if you didn't, or congratulations if you did. There's always a way around it. So it's not really important for this create link. But for the edit link, I did add a precondition, and this one basically reads as if message is empty. So if the message string is empty, then the link is available. So basically, the user cannot continue if the message is empty. For the final step, which is the thank you step, I did add a create link precondition to it. So if message is not empty, then the create link is available, which is basically saying if we're happy with the content in the message string, then we can now move on to the final step. And for the edit link, I added a precondition which basically states if submission confirmation is not true, or if that boolean or if that checkbox has not been selected, then the edit link is available. So basically, if they're not happy with their submission, they do need to select it, otherwise they cannot continue or finish the journey. Okay, so on your side, once you preview the photo competition feature, you should have more than one step available. If you don't have any, again, that's fine. If you have 3 or 4, then you've done something wrong. But you should have probably 1 or 2 that should be available because we did not add, or you didn't add any preconditions on the create links. So switch it over to my side. I'll test my flow by clicking on entry details. So once I enter values into the fields that I created, and the first name field should be a priority because it was a requirement for this part of the exercise. I'm going to only enter 1 character. The edit link should now be available, showing that the user can now edit their submission because only 2 names, or 2 character names, sorry, unless are not allowed. So 2 maximum. Otherwise, if you enter more than 2 characters, then the edit link should disappear, allowing you to continue on. If you did not achieve a similar result towards that exercise, don't worry, as the whole exercise was a refresh towards creating a business feature from scratch. Next, you're going to add translations, as we spoke about before, to your properties and objects, and then conditionally show them based on the current channel setting in preview. If you're confident with the creation of your photo competition business feature for this exercise so far, head on to the next video. If you're still unsure, create a new feature and have a look at my approach. Work through it step by step, play around with it, as a working flow is vital for the second part of this exercise. Here is part 2 of exercise 4. What we're going to do in this part is add translations for the entry details, properties. So add translations to the properties on the entry detail step, which will be fun. Add translations for the desktop channel to the message property on the alternative step. Create another channel called desktop and change the current preconditions on, or add the preconditions to the image capture step. So it will read it as, or should read as, if business context, as in the block, equals channel, and you'll specify the channel. So it will be if business context of channel is equal to the channel mobiles, then load this create link. And also we're going to change or add a precondition to the alternative step to if business context channel is equal to channel called desktop. That will basically conditionally load each of the channels each of the steps based on each of the channels presented, or each of the channels that we created earlier in the settings section of Beekeeper. So have a go at this, play around once you're ready, pause now, but once you're ready, continue, and we'll figure out how we could do this. Okay, so we're going to add translations for the entry details properties first. So first name will be first space name, capitalized rather than first name as in camel casing, as it will normally look on the front end of an application. Then I will change the channel from master to desktop, and only for the message property, change the message property to something else, and then create another channel by returning. And for the desktop channel, I scrolled down to the message property, I added a more reasonable translation, and once I did that, it should be reflective in the preview and also on a front end application. So the next part of the exercise were to change the preconditions or add preconditions. And how I did that was clicking the preconditions checkbox on the create link of the image capture step. And this statement should read as if business context channel is equal to channel mobile, then the link is available. So what I did, I took 3 blocks. I took the equals block, I took the business context block from the variables group, and also the channel block from the variables group. I popped in the channel block to the right hand side of the equals block and selected our channel which we created. So for the image capture step, we want the image capture to load if the user's device has a camera. So for that channel value, I selected mobile or mobiles, and for the business context block, I dragged it into the left hand side of the equals block so that it will read as if business context channel is equal to channel mobile, then you can see the step. And for the alternative step, I did exactly the same thing, but changed the channel from mobile to desktop, meaning that if the user doesn't have a camera available, show the alternative step. So now that we've seen how channels can be implemented in our business rules and our preconditions, how can we actually see them in action? When previewing, you can alter the channel setting as if you were viewing the application on a client-specific device type. Let's preview, then select the cog icon on the left icon of the available tab. Once you select that, we have 3 toggles available. The first one will be Simulate UI Client, which is what we will be using now. And by the way, we can also send custom headers across too, and we can also toggle for offline preview specific use cases. But for now, Simulate UI Client will basically simulate the user experience or user interface depending on which channel you select. So if I was to select desktop, you will now see that the translation that we added earlier will be displayed once we reach the message field. If we were to deselect that channel or restart the preview and choose a different channel or use the default channel, since desktop isn't the default channel at the moment, you shouldn't be able to see, or the user won't be able to see, that translation that you added earlier to the message property. Welcome to section